The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops provides a Christian stance on the issue of domestic violence. As pastors of the Catholic Church in the United States, we state as clearly and strongly as we can that violence against women, inside or outside the home, is never justified. Violence in any form, physical, sexual, psychological, or verbal, is sinful. Often it is a crime as well. We have called for a moral revolution to replace a culture of violence. We acknowledge that violence has many forms, many causes, and many victims, men as well as women. Throughout our video project, we hope to convey the issue of domestic violence and different aspects of the issue, including the motives of abusers, different victims of abuse, how victims leave their relationships, and how we as a society can work towards ending this issue as a whole.
Domestic violence is a widely known but rarely discussed issue in the United States. However, its understanding to the general public does not always convey the true scope of the crime. The United States Department of Justice provides a clear definition of what domestic violence entails.
Domestic violence includes crimes of violence committed by current or former spouses or intimate partners of the victim,
by a person with whom the victim shares a child with,
By a person who is cohabitating with or has cohabitated with the victim as a spouse or intimate partner.
By a person similarly situated to the victim under violence laws of the jurisdiction receiving grant money.
or by any other person against an adult or young person who is protected from that person's acts under the domestic or family violence laws of that jurisdiction.
The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops provides a Christian stance on the issue. As pastors of the Catholic Church in the United States, we state as clearly and strongly as we can that violence against women, inside or outside the home, is never justified. Violence in any form, physical, sexual, psychological, or verbal, is sinful. Often it is a crime as well. We have called for a moral revolution to replace a culture of violence. We acknowledge that violence has many forms, many causes, and many victims, men as well as women.
Physical forms of abuse include beating, choking, hurting the individual with weapons, harming children, and forcing the individual to do drugs or alcohol. Digital abuse includes demanding explicit photos, sending negative, insulting, violent, or explicit online content, and looking through your phone.
Emotional forms of abuse include cheating in a relationship to intentionally hurt the individual, humiliation, blame, control, and threats. Financial forms of abuse include strict control of the allowance, stealing, and forbidding the individual to work.
Domestic violence can start small and grow into a much bigger issue. However, these small signs should be taken very seriously. Each small sign can vary from relationship to relationship. Here are some examples.
Insults, belittlement, or discouragement, or any other form of brainwash.
Instilling fear, damaging property, and making threats that involve violence.
Controlling money, using drugs, pressuring sex, or determining a person's schedule or activities for that day.
I spoke with a woman who works with women in distress about a few questions I had regarding domestic violence. Due to the nature of her work and the privacy of the victims she's helped, she requested to remain anonymous apart from her organization and not to be recorded in any way. I will be reading the notes of our interview. Question 1. Why do people abuse? What are their motives? Abuse is a learned behavior, either from the surroundings they grew in, friends, or through media. However, abuse is a choice, and it's not one that anyone should make. While outside forces such as drugs or alcohol addiction can sometimes escalate abuse, it is most important to recognize that these issues do not cause abuse. Abuse comes from an individual's choices, not those of the people around them or the factors around them. Motives result in a similar way and range from ignorance to controlling their partner.
Victims can include husbands and wives,
Members of the LGBTQ community,
Immigrants.
disabled people,
and pregnant women.
fear,
Abuse is the norm.
Fear of exposure.
embarrassment,
no self-value,
Love.
religion or culture,
language or documentation.
The inability to provide for themselves.
And disability.
No matter why it happens, abuse is never okay, and it's never justified.
Jesus has repeatedly mentioned in the scriptures that we should treat each other as equals. By partaking and bystanding in domestic violence, we directly undermine the Church's view of Imago Dei and the importance of creation.
Imago Dei is the principle that we are all made in the image and likeness of God. In this instant, the abuser is failing to realize that the victim is the same as he or she is. Inherently, they are equals. The abuser is neglected a truth. Applying Imago Dei more directly, an abuser can be considered to directly abusing God, and that his victim is made in the image and likeness of God. Abuse and violence against others in general is a sin. We would now like to provide the rest of our interview from Women in Distress.
Question 2. For victims, why is it so hard to leave an abusive relationship? There are factors such as fear, believing abuse is normal, fear of being outed in LGBTQ relationships, embarrassment or shame, low self-esteem, cultural and religious reasons, and barriers such as language and immigration status that often create dependency, which in turn leads Question 3. How do victims leave their abusive relationship? Is there anything they should do or should not do when they are trying to leave? Many victims need to seek outside help in order to leave abusive relationships due to their naturally tense nature. You should keep your goals clear and attempt to leave in the safest way possible. You should not be afraid to get the law involved, and you should not make excuses that you, the victim, are at fault for the abuse that is taking place. Question 4. What are some ways the community can help? Knowing the signs of abuse, not ignoring people who demonstrate signs, and knowing helpline numbers. Also checking in on the victim and getting the word out of abuse. And as a consumer, not supporting media that promotes violence and degradation of women and men in any manner, especially sexual, are all ways that we can help. Question 5. Is there anything else you would like to add? Domestic violence stops when everyone makes it known. Therefore, silence should never be an option. We, as both witnesses and victims, should not hold our silence. The more we speak about domestic violence, the more people will feel comfortable to get the help that they need. This concludes the interview I had with the woman who works with women in distress here in Broward.
We had Ivan interview a priest to gain a Catholic perspective on domestic violence.
Alright. What is the best way to assist someone in an abusive relationship?
I think the best way to support someone in an abusive relationship would be first assessing what some abuse that's occurring is, if necessary, counseling, and also even reporting it to the authorities if necessary in order to be able to help them because of resources that could be attained. But also really counseling and walking with this person in order to stop or avoid get away from this abusive relationship.
What are some ways that the community can help victims of abuse?
The community can help victims of abuse first by being aware of what are some of the signs and being able to name. Most victims of abuse are scared to approach or to come forward, and so being able to recognize some of the signs of abuse is helpful to be able to name that, and they can help by then reporting and bringing to someone that can help, or at least approaching the person to clarify.
How do you suggest supporting victims who have left their abusive relationship?
I think so. People that have left their abusive relationships, I think they could be supported by continued outreach. So people checking in to see how they're doing. And also something that often happens with abuse victims is they may reach a point where they believe that maybe some of it was their fault, and so convincing them against that, and being able to walk through what are some of the stages of grief and post-traumatic stress that they may be dealing with in order to move forward. From a Catholic perspective in abuse, some of the issues that you're dealing with are there's a lack of respect for the dignity of the human person, and so the person themselves isn't being respected for who they are as being created by God in His image and likeness. And so because of that, there's a grave sin being committed by the abuser. Also, oftentimes the person experiencing the abuse has a warped sense of what true humility is. The saints tell us that true humility is seeing yourself as God sees you, not more than that, but also not less than that. And so for us to believe that we deserve the abuse is a misunderstanding of what real humility is, and takes us away from that identity in which the Lord desires us to live in and to always be aware of.
Is there anything you would like to add to this topic?
I think it's important for all of us as community members, as people that are Catholics and rooted in our faith, to be aware of what our own responsibility is in terms of abuse. That there's a lot of things that for us to be aware of and to have been formed in, to recognize what are signs of abuse. That if we recognize that someone is a victim, how do we take the steps in order to get them the help that they need in order to be taken out of that situation.
Jesus has repeatedly mentioned in the scriptures that we should treat each other as equals. By partaking and bystanding in domestic violence, we directly undermine the Church's views of Imago Dei and the importance of creation. A healthy relationship is key to Imago Dei and living a life devoted to Christ.
Healthy relationships have many characteristics which categorize them as healthy. This, along with the way they confront conflict and hardship, is what makes them healthy. Some of these characteristics are as follows: mutual respect, trust, honesty, compromise, individuality, good communication skills, anger control, fighting fairly, problem solving, understanding one another, self-confidence, and being role models within the relationship themselves. This, along with other characteristics such as being caring towards their partner and being committed towards their partner, are what makes healthy relationships work. As we evaluate in this video, abusive relationships often lack things such as these characteristics.
There are many ways to get help from domestic violence. However, resources available at one's fingertips is the National Domestic Violence Hotline website. This website provided adequate information for our project and even more information for anyone who is a victim of domestic violence. It even provides a safe screen tool to prevent the abuser from seeing the victim's activities.
Rolling.
Domestic abuse is never okay. If you or a loved one have been affected by domestic abuse, please call 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 1-800-799-7233.